Typical AngularJS workflow and project structure with Python Flask. I am pretty new to this whole MV** client-side framework frenzy. It doesn't have to be AngularJS, but I picked it because it feels more natural to me than either Knockout, Ember, or Backbone. Anyway, what is the workflow like? Do people start with developing a client-side application in AngularJS and then hooking up the backend to it? Or the other way around, by first building the backend in Django, Flask, Rails, and then attaching an AngularJS app to it? Is there a right way of doing it, or is it just a personal preference in the end? I am also not sure whether to structure my project according to the Flask or AngularJS community practices. For example, Flask's Minutewid app is structured like so. AngularJS tutorial app is structured like this. I could picture a Flask app by itself, and it's fairly easy to see AngularJS app like to-do list by itself, but when it comes to using both of these technologies, I don't understand how they work together. It almost seems like I don't need a server-side web framework when you already have AngularJS. A simple Python web server will suffice. In the AngularJS to-do app, for example, they use MongoLab to talk to the database using RESTful API. There was no need having a web framework on the backend. Maybe I am just awfully confused, and AngularJS is nothing more than a fancy jQuery library, so I should use just like I would use jQuery in my Flask projects, assuming I change the AngularJS template syntax to something that doesn't conflict with Jinja 2. I hope my questions make some sense. I mainly work on the backend, and this client-side framework is an unknown territory for me.
You can start on either end. You are right that you probably don't need a full server-side framework with AngularJS. It's typically better to serve static HTML, CSS, JavaScript files, and provide a RESTful API for the back-end for the client to consume. One thing that you should probably avoid is mixing server-side templates with AngularJS client-side templates. If you want to use Flask to serve your files, might be overkill, but you can use it nonetheless. You would copy the contents of app from Angular PhoneCat into the static folder of Minutewid. AngularJS is more targeted at Ajax-like applications, whereas Flask gives you the ability to do both the older-style web apps as well as create RESTful APIs. There are advantages and disadvantages to each approach, so it really depends what you want to do. If you give me some insights, I might be able to make further recommendations.
I would start out by organizing the Flask app in the standard structure as follows. And as Ford mentioned, if you are doing an Angular app, you will want to focus on using Angular client-side templates and stay away from server-side templates. Using render_template index.html will cause Flask to interpret your Angular templates as Jinja templates, so they won't render correctly. Instead, you will want to do the following. Note that using send_file means that the files will be cached, so you might want to use make_response instead, at least for development. Afterwards, build out the AngularJS part of your app, modifying the app structure so that it looks like this. Make sure your index.html includes AngularJS, as well as any other files. At this point, you haven't yet constructed your RESTful API, so you can have your JS controllers return predefined sample data, only a temporary setup. When you're ready, implement the RESTful API and hook it up to your Angular app with AngularResource.js. Edit. I put together an app template that, though a little more complex than what I've described above, illustrates how one could build an app with AngularJS plus Flask, complete with communication between AngularJS and a simple Flask API. Here it is if you want to check it out, this URL.
Edit. The new Angular 2 style guide suggests a similar, if not the same structure in much more detail. The answer below target large-scale projects. I have spent quite some time thinking and experimenting with several approaches so I can combine some server-side framework, Flask with App Engine in my case, for back-end functionality along with a client-side framework like Angular. Both answers are very good, but I would like to suggest a slightly different approach which, in my mind at least, scales in a more human way. When you are implementing a to-do example, things are quite straightforward. When you start adding functionality though and small nice details for user experience improvement, it's not difficult to get lost in chaos of styles, JavaScript, etc. My application started to grow quite big, so I had to take a step back and rethink. Initially, an approach like suggested above would work by having all the styles together and all JavaScript together, but it's not modular and not easily maintainable. What if we organize the client code per feature and not per file type? And so on. If we build it like this, we can wrap every directory of ours in an Angular module. And we have split our files in a nice way that we don't have to go through irrelevant code when we are working with a specific feature. A task runner like Grunt properly configured will be able to find and concatenate and compile your files without much hassle.
This official JetBrains PyCharm video by John Lindquist, AngularJS, and JetBrains Guru, is a nice starting point, as it shows the interplay of web service, database, and Angular.js within Flask. He builds a Pinterest clone with Flask, SQL Alchemy, Flask Restless, and Angular.js in less than 25 minutes. Enjoy. This URL.
Я обучал. Вы не работаете.